welcome to Mad Men Men, a podcast dedicated to recapping and analyzing the AMC series Mad Men from the perspective of three very different types of watchers. We have someone here who is watching the show for the very first time with us, and someone else who is rewatching the show for the first time since it finished airing in 2015. And then there's me, Jon Negroni, and I've been wondering if I can podcast something through a window. We also have Will Ashton, our first-time watcher. And Will, when are you going to get back to normal?
I thought you were going to say, when am I going to get on diet pills, which would be harsh, but fair.
And of course, we have Mike Overhulse, our first-time rewatcher. And Mike, I don't care if people think you're obnoxious as long as they think you're funny.
The diet pills are speed, right? Like, we're all going to do
so.
speed.
We're all going to do, well, if you say so. We're here to talk about Mad Men Season 5, Episode 3, Tea Leaves, the first episode of Mad Men directed by Jon Hamm. We have Aaron Levy and Matthew Weiner as the co-writers, and the episode came out April 1st, 2012. It was a bit of a dip in the ratings from the premiere, but still pretty high relative to the rest of the Mad Men series. In fact, the ratings are 2.94, which is higher than the season 4, episode 1 ratings. So clearly season 5 is when the show really was starting to hit its ratings stride. And so, Will, we got to start with you on this one. Tea Leaves, we're coming off of the two-parter, and Betty is back. And you are, of course, again, you're the first-time watcher. You're watching it for the first time. What was your overall take on this episode?
I thought it was pretty good. I think I was a little let down considering how strong I found the first two episodes to be, the two-parter, as it were. I think it kind of comes down to me being a little underwhelmed by Jon Hamm's direction in the episode. I don't think the writing or the acting's any worse. I just feel like I kind of got the same vibe that I got. I don't know if you guys have watched Breaking Bad, but I know like Bryan Cranston did direct some episodes of Breaking Bad, and it's like those episodes aren't bad, but they do kind of feel like, okay, it's a little bit of a step down because like the visual imagery, it's a little more like the metaphors can be a little more obvious. There's a little less like sophistication from a direction standpoint in terms of presenting the information visually. And I feel like Jon Hamm's style here is like perfectly fine. Like I think one benefit to being on like a great show and like kind of using that to be making your directorial debut is that you're just surrounded by like so many talented people that you're going to do, unless something disastrous happens, like a probably admirable with a pretty good job. But I just never really felt like this episode stood out compared to last ones. And I have to kind of point the blame at Jon Hamm as a director, I think. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think, because I don't come into this being desiring to be critical of Hamm as a director. I certainly quite like him as an actor.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we'll roll it to Mike, but just a little bit of a tidbit from the audio commentaries, because I did get to listen to Jon Hamm and Matthew Weiner talk about the episode with Aaron Levy. And Hamm is pretty clear about his approach with the episode, which I think you picked up on. His thing was he didn't want to rock the boat, basically. He was like, I want to keep the same tone. I want to keep the style. I think his exact quote was like, I want to keep the train on the tracks. Like he didn't want to have his own distinct directorial stamp. And, there's a plus side and there's a downside to that, especially when you contrast it with John Slattery and his style, which he was totally fine with rocking the boat. And I think my theory, maybe Mike will disagree, is I think part of the issue too is that because Jon Hamm is so much of the show and the main star, that makes it, like to what you're saying, Will, it makes it harder because he's so close to it as Don, that I think it's different than John Slattery coming in because Roger is not the show. And so he is more of a passive observer to a lot of this stuff compared to, I think, Jon Hamm. So much of the show has ridden on him. It'd be sort of similar to like if Matthew Weiner was trying to be like the main character for an episode. I think you would see some of that same weirdness. But yeah,
I mean, I think it's fair to say that Matthew Weiner has main character energy as a person, but he's not the main character of the show.
Fair enough. But Mike, you rewatched this episode for the first time recently. Yeah, did you have a similar take?
Yeah, I mean, I actually never thought about it how you just described it, John, but I do think it makes sense. Like, just also kind of understanding Jon Hamm, like as a person from what he's revealed in interviews and things like that. I could definitely understand him being uncomfortable with, because it is a pretty Don heavy episode, like very compared to when Jon Slattery directed, and there's a little bit of Roger. There wasn't a ton of Roger. That being said, I also think when you compare those two episodes, I think this one's a little bit tougher. There's like multiple threads going on. Like We're getting a lot of different storylines in this episode. You have not just everything in the office or in like the sets in the homes. You have the backstage set, which I would imagine that's a pretty difficult shoot of understanding, like making it feel cramped. You have all these extras you're dealing with, kind of weird angles.
Yeah,
So
can I
I
say
think
two things about that? What? Yeah, I'll put a pin on that and let you finish, and then yeah. Oh no, you can go ahead
you
first.
go for
Yeah.
it. I was just gonna
Okay.
say, I think I don't think he was very adventurous, but I do think it was a more like, it's hard to compare it to the John Slattery episode just because it was a more difficult episode. There's just one like crossfade from like a Betty. I think it's going from like a Betty thing, and they like do a crossfade into something else, and I really hated that. But other than that, I thought everything else was just like fine, and that's like the best you could say.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So a big thing about the Rolling Stones concert that, well, first of all, Weiner said, he was like, we knew we weren't going to show Rolling Stones. And, so that was part of it. But in terms of that set, they actually used the parking garage for like their usual studio lot. So that's like a Pasadena parking garage that they literally went in and they dressed it up and like they made it look worse, like more faded and aged and everything like that. And they also had some trouble, like they had to get the extras to talk louder because they couldn't really get sound in that sort of environment. It's just one of those little things, right? That like you can sort of tell that Hamm was not very confident because he was kind of handed a tricky episode in a lot of respects, maybe by design. And he even kind of says in the commentary that like Aaron Levy was kind of watching over his shoulder to make sure, like kind of giving him guidance, but also keeping him in check as well. So I think there was some pressure to rein him in. And so something to consider, in terms of other actors who might be directing future episodes.
I mean, yeah, I think that kind of sums it up because like Mad Men always kind of comes out of the gate so confident and so kind of assured of its style. And even though like I don't think it's like an incompetent episode or anything, I think it's fine as far as how it's presented. Actually, I mean, to Hamm's credit, like I think there are some really starkly directed scenes between Betty and Henry, and kind of showing this new house and like kind of showing the divide between them that shows like, okay, like he's not like totally pedestrian as a director. Like I think he's like putting some thought in. I think he's engaged. But like you're saying, John, it just kind of feels like either he's not fully confident as a director or maybe he's just kind of too busy doing actor homework that like directing maybe can't like fully take his investment. I'm not exactly sure, but it just doesn't feel like it's like on par with some of the episodes we've gotten prior, which is a tall order. I mean, like you said, like not only is this like kind of like substantial episode for continuing to establish the dynamic of the season, but like Mike's suggesting, it's like there's a fair bit of back and forth with characters with the ensemble here, and it's not like like a more casual laid back episode where maybe Jon Hamm's kind of more calm, level headed sort of direction would service it better. I don't know. It just maybe it wasn't just the right fit for filmmaker and episode, but yeah, I mean, not a bad episode by any means. Just I think it would have been serviced better by a stronger director.
I think maybe John Slattery probably would have done a better job because I think the themes of the episode kind of align a little bit more with his contribution to the show creatively, but that's speculation. The episode itself is called Tea Leaves as a reference to the big Betty plot, right? So there's the scene where she gets her fortune told. And one thing, I'm of two minds when it comes to the themes of the episode. On the one hand, I think the way everything kind of connects pretty much works. Like it's a strong message of like the youth taking over. I like how the show at this point is recognizing the explosion of youth culture in the 1960s in the way that it is, right? There are a lot of nice touches to that. And this episode like uses the sets. It uses like the Victorian mansion that they live in, which is, by the way, they shot that on location. It's in downtown LA, that whole mansion. It's a real place. And I like how that is like contrasting, right, with like the youth stuff of like the parking garage and sitting in the car eating White Castle, like little things like that, that just, even the contrast between, the way that Harry is trying to fit in and the way that Don is purposely trying to stand out. And then, of course, the contrast between the way that Megan, wants to go to Fire Island, hang out with her friends versus Betty, who is in this new stage of her life, which we'll get into for sure. Now, on the one hand, I'm like, these are strong themes. On the other hand, I feel like the show's already done this. It's already talked about this stuff. It's finding some new ground with it, I guess. And I think the strongest parts of the episode for me are when it has to do with Roger and Pete, because that feels more severe. It feels a little bit better written. I think like Peggy and Ginsberg is sort of like it approximates, I think, the tension, but even Peggy is feeling like, no, like good work is good work. But then Roger is the more cautionary tale in that respect. And that's where I think it works. Where I don't think it works is I don't like the parking garage stuff. I do not like the Rolling Stones concert scenes. I think it's so on the nose. The whole thing with like Hamm talking to that one girl and the way, like the acting there too, the writing, I just feel like it's so not, I think, like up to the right standards for me personally.
I think I have rose-colored glasses when it comes to this episode because in all of Mad Men, I think it's like has one of my top 5 favorite lines in this episode, which I've always really liked, which is when Roger's leaving Don's office and he goes, "When are things going to go back to normal?"
Yeah, it hits.
It really does. And I think on this rewatch, I also really appreciated it more than I have in my previous watch, just because I feel like I'm on the older side of the younger generation. Like I'm 29, right? So by no means am I old, but by no means am I also like young. I'm not like Gen Z or anything. And is this a sentiment I think I can really appreciate more than I did when I was 18. I'm not part of like this youthful, not like counterculture, but also just how crazy life is right now. It's just this thing of like, man, I remember what it was like 20 years ago. Things are just much more simple, and this idea that you want it to go back. But as you said, like definitely things Mad Men has visited and made comments on. But that's also just kind of the thing about it, though, is that it's going to have to keep making comments on it because that kind of shit, especially in the 60s, really never did stop. Like it really did just keep going and get wilder and wilder.
Yeah, because that's one of the richest things about rewatching the show. I'll tell you what, Will, because when I first watched the show, I was kind of more of a Peggy because I was so young. Rewatching the show later on, I was closer to Pete. Nowadays, I'm getting closer to Don's age at the beginning of the show. And so the more you rewatch the show, the different kind of, I guess lens-colored glasses, to borrow from Mike, you start to employ. And I do want to say real quick that in the commentary, Hamm says that, like, specifically what you're talking about, Mike, like when do things go back to normal? He makes the observation or the comment that this is why people tend to become conservative as they get older, because they want to go back to a time that makes sense to them, that feels more familiar, but it's not something you can actually do. You can't really turn back the clock. It's just sort of like a reactionary response to things around you changing.
Yeah, I mean, not to bring up the sort of elephant in the room of the conversation, but yeah, I mean, that line for me kind of struck a more sour turn because I just kept thinking about like how fucked up everything's going to get because of people with that similar mentality of just like, I want things to be back the way they are before, so we're going to re-vote for Trump and everything's going to be fucking awful again. Sorry, I mean, I know that's not really the vibe we want to have right now, but like, I couldn't help but think about that when I heard that line. But I do feel for Roger.
Yeah.
How could you not? I mean, it makes sense. How could you not think that?
Well, even liberals, I think, have a similar kind of like, when do things go back to normal? Because liberals can be pretty conservative in some ways, right? Like, I see this, like people who don't like Trump, who didn't vote for him, are just kind of like, oh, I just want things to go back to like when we had people like Obama and Clinton and Romney and McCain. And again, it's the same kind of mentality. It's like, it's a conservative mentality, but it's like, we're never getting back to that time. Like, we're never going to be back in the Bush era. Like, things are always just going to change. And yeah, it's something you kind of have to accept as you get older. And I think we say that, of course, with the privilege of still being pretty youthful, but I think it's going to get harder and harder as we get older.
The classic, I would have voted for Obama a third time mentality. Yeah.
Well, that mentality is also pretty racist if we're going to take it seriously. That man, anyways, this is not a Get Out.
Are you telling me that Get Out deals with racism?
I do just want to say like one more thing about the episode I had a little bit of beef with. Like, is it clear to either of you, like when, like not year wise when this is taking place, but like specifically like what weekend or like what month or anything like that?
Wait, what weekend or month? What do you mean? Like when it?
Like this episode, like did I miss it being like clear of when it is? Because it's
I have to double check the trivia, but it is a real concert for the Rolling Stones playing. I believe this is July 1966. I don't have that note in front of me.
You're right. It is July. It's 4th of July weekend. like this entire episode.
Oh yeah, because they go to Fire Island. Oh yeah, that kind of just
exactly. Well, it's not. I didn't realize it. I googled the baseball player that Ginsberg's dad talks about dying, and he dies on July 5th. So it just, I don't know. It's just like one of those things where I was like, I don't know, kind of weird to like. It definitely doesn't feel very 4th of July. I mean, Roger never puts on blackface, so what are we doing?
I didn't really bother, or that didn't bother me as much because like I think there are some signifiers, and I kind of like how understated they are. Like 2 of the best shots I think in this episode are when like Betty's just kind of like wistfully thinking while like the sprinklers are kind of going around with like Sally. Yeah, I thought that was. Yeah. I thought that was actually like a pretty lovely little sequence, and you know, that was actually kind of where I was like, okay, maybe maybe Hamm has some room to grow as a director if he kind of goes more or less understated approach as opposed to like kind of laying it on thick as he does sometimes in the episode. But I don't know if that will really showcase in the other episodes that he directs. I'm not sure.
I definitely want to talk about the Betty stuff in particular. There's a lot going on there. No pun on the weight intended. But real quick, the critical reception of the episode I thought would be pretty interesting to look into, and definitely a mix of critical responses. Not all critics like this episode for sure. So I looked at the Den of Geek review of the episode, and basically they said that like they were pretty disappointed, and it felt like one of the first like truly subpar episodes of the show. Basically saying that Betty's storyline was too rushed, that it was, quote, uncharacteristically breathless, and there just wasn't like that same kind of depth, overall. But then, I found other reviews, like the IGN review was pretty favorable overall. A lot of praise going January Jones's way for kind of just what she does with Betty in this episode, like being vulnerable, but kind of showing like with her cancer scare, really like kind of that would have more depth than I think maybe the Den of Geek review was engaging with. And then also, they praise the general tensions of the episode, particularly with the Rolling Stone stuff, which I just kind of disagree. I just don't think that's really where the episode hangs its hat. I think that the episode really comes in its own when Michael Ginsberg with Ben Feldman shows up. Truly one of the great like newcomers to the show we get overall. But then lastly, AV Club. So that was Emily St. James's review, which I always read the AV Club reviews when I rewatch the show. So I reread these because I just find them to be the best, like most consistent takes and perspectives on the show, like when it actually hit. And it was a pretty, like it was a B+ grade, so pretty positive. And I think James definitely appreciated the Betty stuff too a lot. So that's kind of where I want to go with it. And before I turn it to you guys, because I do want to get more of like, what do you think of the Betty stuff overall? Kind of, another elephant in the room. Again, I'm not trying to make puns on the weight. That's not who I am. But the reason that they actually went with Betty like gaining some weight, it wasn't for the writing's sake. It was because January Jones was 8 months pregnant when they were shooting this stuff, and they had a couple of different options. They could either hide it or they could write that she was pregnant again, and they decided they didn't want to do either of that. It was actually, it's strongly implied in the commentaries that Aaron Levy was the one who really went forward with like, I really think that it makes the most sense for her to be kind of eating her misery, I think is how she phrases it. And she's talking about how now that Don is married, now that Don, she can't blame her unhappiness on Don anymore. She can't sort of like have this rivalry tension with him anymore. And now she has to like directly compete with Megan, who is younger. And I think all of these things are just pushing her to like try to, on the conservative mindset thing again, try to genuflect back to her childhood, the whole 16 going on 17 song at the end being the obvious, referral of that. And it's this mentality of like, why can't things just go back to normal? And like down to the fact that like who's the first person she calls, like when she can't find Henry, she doesn't even try calling Henry. She calls Don. Right. So that's some of the stuff that I think works pretty well here.
And there's like that very telling kind of quiet moment where Dawn calls her Birdie again for probably the first time in like years. That was like kind of touching just because like it's an honest, genuine kind of moment between the two of them. For one, I have to say, I don't know. Did you see this, Mike, where when, I don't know what happened with Riverside, but when John said uncharacteristically breathless, a bunch of balloons just came up on the screen. And I don't know why or what the reason was.
Because I did the quote thing.
Okay.
And so I think yeah.
Okay.
I didn't do it that time. Maybe I just did something else. I don't know.
I just thought like Riverside just is like uncharacteristically breathless. And then it's like, you said the magic word. Like,
hell yeah. Yeah. Like,
But
every episode of Mad Men should have a secret word. Yes.
Right. I didn't know what was going on there. And I know it doesn't mean anything to listeners, but I felt I needed to comment on that just for how bizarre it was. But anyway, no, I think the stuff that I like the most about this episode kind of ties to Betty and her weight. And even though I'm a little kind of conflated on like, I don't know if it's treated the most sensitively or like, I don't know.
Conflicted?
Conflicted. Yes. My mouth was a little conflicted, I guess, saying that word. but yeah, no, I think I can't really tell if like Matthew Weiner and crew have like the best intentions as far as, exploring that in the most sensitive or nuanced way. But I do remember, and guys, don't get mad at me. I'm sorry I read Entertainment Weekly in 2012, but I do remember this was kind of like a news story in like back then because they were talking about like, oh, this is kind of an unconventional approach because like they were talking about like January Jones is pregnant. How are they going to get around the, that with Mad Men? But it's like rather than make Betty pregnant, they're like, she's gained weight. And it's like, I remember the conversation generally. I didn't really dive into it too deep because I wasn't watching the show at the time. But I do remember hearing about Fat Betty. So I was very curious to see this part of the show come to form. But I do think, like you were saying or suggesting, John, that like this does tie thematically into her character. Like we know that her mom's weight is something that was like kind of something that troubled her mom, and then her mom died. Like
her dad said that she was a chubby kid. Her mom,
right.
would basically abuse her in order to get her to like lose weight. Yeah.
And I think the idea of like her gaining weight and also having this death scare, I think it's a pretty poignant way of like tying into what's essentially an episode about the idea of like feeling out of touch with the generation that's getting away from you. And the idea in Betty's case of like not only becoming her mother, but not being there for her family and like not being able to live her own life and feeling full of regrets and all this stuff. And I think that's the stuff that I really connected to more than anything else in the episode. I think it's to the episode's benefit that that's kind of a central focus of it, especially considering Betty not being in the first two episodes from what I can recall. But yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I like I said, I take some issues with like, it does kind of feel like they're doing some like Nutty Professor fat jokes at times, but like at the same time, I think that there is a lot of thoughtfulness and care into that storyline. So I was impressed. I'm curious to see where that's going to go in future episodes.
Yeah, well, it's the inverse, right? Of because we've done this before with like when Peggy they gave Peggy the prosthetics, and in season 1, and in that case, she actually was pregnant. Not the actress, but the character. And so they've kind of gone down this road before. And in this case, to what you're saying, there was a lot of chatter about how difficult this was for Jones because, again, 8 months pregnant. In the scene where Pauline comes over and they have their little knife match in the mansion, it was 95 degrees that day. January Jones has to wear all these prosthetics. Yeah, I mean, it must have been miserable. And Hamm is like trying to recognize that. It's like, man, thank goodness for Jones. And I'm just kind of like, can you not bring a fan in there or something? Like, sheesh, that sounds awful. Also, though, I do want to say, I really like the dream sequence. I do think that was a good example of like where Hamm is kind of good at just like restraining himself, because it would have been so easy for that to go a little bit too far. But it's nicely, I think he did have a leg up because it does fit in with that dream sequence from The Fog, I think it was, or whenever it was like the Medgar Evers death, and she's like, her father is dead, and like, he's like sweeping up and all that, like that kind of thing. It definitely feels a piece of that. Like, yes, this is the same, tone of how Betty basically like her subconscious works.
I was all for that, except for the kind of clunky close-up shot of the tea leaves cup. Like, I think there was a more artful way of doing that, and it just kind of felt like, oh, that's here. Be able to focus on that. That's the title of the episode.
Doing the Leo DiCaprio like pointing at the screen,
right? Yeah.
No, I the Betty stuff. You guys know me. I'm typically not the biggest fan of Betty storylines, but I dig this one, and I think I was very impressed with just how Jones like portrays this. I think the best of Betty is when she actually, I don't know, has like a little bit deeper storyline rather than like I'm a child and selfish, which is only like, I don't know, a couple steps beyond, but I still find it pretty compelling. I'll also mention personally, it's a very timely episode. My wife actually is getting a lump removed from her thyroid in like a month. It's not cancerous, but still, like,
oh, thank God.
I saw a lot of like this path like happening in my own life, so I just thought it was very interesting. But was I gonna say? Yeah, I really appreciate John's performance through it all. And yeah, definitely. When it comes to the weight stuff, I think there's two things. One, I think they have to approach it head on. Like, it does make the most sense for her character. Like, it is absolutely something that's happening to housewives of that time. It's something rooted in Betty specifically. They have set it up, so I have no qualms with it. I also think, I mean, 2012 when this episode comes out, like, there's a really weird just weight culture in 2012. Like, you're leaving the early 2000s where like people were calling like Jessica Simpson obese for being just a regular person, but like we're not exactly to people being okay with like fatness, right? Like
We're not in the
it's
Lizzo
kind of like
era yet.
exactly. There's like this. It's like this weird middle ground. So I can see like I do appreciate it. I think to that regard that I don't know. I think it lends itself to the dialogue of its time, and I do think it's pushing more towards what was going to happen in the later 20s and beyond.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause you can sense like Betty wants so badly to blame this on anyone but, the issues that she's having with her past, right? Because she can't blame it on Henry. Henry is being nothing but kind to her. And I think that he's really good in this episode. I think that Henry too, like one of my favorite pieces of trivia, he has a work phone in the house. So it's just for like the political phone calls. And again, this is 2012, right? This was the election year for Obama and Romney. And so there's a nice little Easter egg there to, I think his name is George Romney. So Mitt Romney's father, who was the governor of Michigan. And so they have like a little line about that because remember, Henry works for Governor Lindsay, the governor of New York. And so there, in the commentary, they kind of talk about this of like, yeah, that's actually how, even people who are in the same party, in this case, the Republican Party, they have these kinds of like, oh, he shouldn't be on stage with that man. There's like a lot of like little petty rivalries and stuff. And I also saw that around this time, apparently Tag Romney, the son of Mitt Romney, apparently like took issue with this episode and was complaining of like the way that, it's like, oh, you're making fun of my grandpa or whatever. And to me, it's so fucking quaint compared to like politics in 2024 of like, what are the Romney kids being like, this TV show was a little rude. And it's like, Jesus Christ, how things have like completely escalated beyond all manner.
Meanwhile, the current sitting president is calling political adversaries' wives dogs. Like, it's
well, he's the president-elect as we record this, but yes.
I mean, also, Vince McMahon's wife's going to be the Department of Education. Like, TV and politics are also just conflating now. Like,
yeah.
Like we've have a head of Department of Education that's gotten like a POW drive from like Triple H or whatever at this point. Like, what is reality at this point? Like,
he got it from Kane.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm glad you fact checked me on that.
Maybe we shouldn't, discuss things we're not experts in. Okay, that's a pretty sensitive topic there.
Well, yeah. Speaking of sensitive political topics, let's talk about the Jewish experience in New York. Michael Ginsberg makes his triumphal entry.
Everybody's got one, John. Everyone's
got one. Yeah, isn't it such an amazing, mark of the last 6 years in the show's time of like that early episode where it's like, oh, we're going to have a Jewish client. We need to find a Jewish person or whatever.
Go to the mail.
They go to the mailroom and then that guy is like, clearly like, and then they have all the like the little misses with like, they're trying to give her shellfish and all this. Anyway. Michael Ginsberg, they've hired a Jewish copywriter, a sign of the times, and Ben Feldman comes in around this time. I think he hadn't done Silicon Valley yet, and I forget he was doing like things here and there, but he definitely this was way before Superstore, like So this is an early Ben Feldman role.
He was in Cloverfield by this point, right? 2008. Yeah.
Oh yeah, maybe yeah. I feel like Cloverfield though. I don't really remember him in that, but. So it's not like he was an unfamiliar, but this is before he kind of became more of like people. Oh, I know that guy. What was he in again? Superstore, like that kind of experience. But Michael Ginsberg, one of my favorite characters in the whole show, and I just love his energy. I love his quirks. I love how like his conversations with Peggy feel straight out of like a 1930s screwball rom-com, even though there's no romantic spark between them. At least in this episode, I'll let you. Will continue to guess. Will they, won't they, could they, should they? But yeah, Will, Ginsberg, what do you think? I know you're well aware of his presence in the show because of all the memes.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's at least one meme that I won't spoil for anyone that happens to somehow not know what it is. But yeah, I mean, I think probably one of the like top 5 most famous memes from the show is involving his character. So I've been aware of his involvement with the show in the second half, but I didn't know when he was going to come up. But yeah, he's finally here, and I'm very curious to see how he makes an impact in the show and in The Office. But also another like prominent, actor, or I guess actress, I should say, is in this. Is it Tiana
Paris? Yeah, Dawn. And I want to have a whole thing about Dawn because that's one of my favorite parts of this whole episode, and it's in the commentary has some good stuff in there. But real quick, wait, no, go ahead.
I just want to say, like, obviously she's not a super big part of this episode. It's kind of more of a like, hey, that's a resolution to that thing that happened in the last episode. But
yes.
But she's a pretty like she was in Chirac, she was in They Clone Tyrone, she's now in the Marvels, and like I think she was in WandaVision or whatever. She's like, yeah.
She's definitely broken out over the last 5 or 6 years. Okay, so but with you, Michael, because you're also named Michael. Is this Michael Ginsberg up to snuff? If you are a judge of such things?
Yeah, he's definitely a Michael. He's not a Mike. I think that's a pretty big distinction.
Glad you said it, so I didn't have to. Yeah. But yeah, you like this character, right? Like, as you're rewatching it, is he somebody that you were just kind of like you couldn't wait for him to come into the show, or no?
Yeah, no, I've definitely been waiting for him. I would say he's like probably of like the back half characters, easily in the top 3, maybe like fighting for fate.
Oh yeah, I'm with you.
I won't say who else because
Yeah. Sal doesn't count. Just kidding, Will. Sorry.
Oh wait, no.
But yeah, I think what I like about him is like because right now you have this dynamic with Peggy and Stan, and like they need a third. Like you need a third stooge, like for them to kind of continue having fun B plot stories. And we cycled through like we had Joey, we kind of had the Danny character. I feel like those were auditions. I feel like here comes Michael Ginsberg. I think that he has a great stamp on this episode, but also the show itself. There's a nice little Easter egg too when you're going through his book and like the ads and everything, which the consultant to the show, I forget his name, was the one who came up with those ads, and Weiner praised him for doing such a good job. But there's a one of the ads, blink and you'll miss it. It shows white carpet, and the ad is saying like, I don't know what came over me, like basically alluding directly to the last episode where the white carpet and Don and Megan have their little on the carpet there. So I thought that was a nice little well, when mommy and a daddy love each other very much and they just had a big fight because daddy doesn't like surprise parties, then they have rough passionate makeup sex on white carpets full of garbage from the said party.
And is Don the mommy or the daddy?
It depends on. We didn't get to see that whole scene play out, so we don't. It depends, on what they said out loud. I gotta say, since we're talking about trivia stuff, and I forgot to mention this, so this is a great piece of trivia that I actually did not know until this rewatch. But so much of the episode, right, is about how it's so uncool, like to do advertising, like with like a big cool band like the Rolling Stones, right? And so like there's the whole like the instigation for that entire thing with the Rolling Stones is that Raymond from Heinz Baked Beans is like, oh, Heinz is on your side. Can you do like some kind of, apparently in December 1967, there was a Heinz Baked Beans ad with The Who, but it was basically The Who made an album called The Who Sell Out. And one of the songs is literally called Heinz Baked Beans. And there's like a couple of like vintage ads you can find online where it's like the Who, like they're in this like bathtub of beans and they're holding up a huge can. And it's hilarious. I had no idea about this, like watching the show.
I mean, The Who Sell Out, that's like one of their most famous albums, right?
I The Who, like I listened to them plenty over the years, but I'm definitely not, I wasn't even aware of that whole thing.
I think I'm only slightly aware just because Heinz, as the episode mentions, is a big cornerstone of Pittsburgh. So I think that's my awareness of that ad. But yeah, that is a cool connection. I didn't really think about that until you just pointed it out.
Pretty cool. All right. Is there anything else that you guys want to cover? I do want to get into Dawn and how all that stuff plays out. Specifically, apparently, the idea behind her having the same name as Dawn is it was a joke that so Weiner actually asks Aaron Levy this. He's like, how did we? And she's like, I don't remember. Apparently, it happened in the writer's room organically. but the idea behind it is that they want to distract from the fact that she's black. And so they were like, so they wanted the jokes and the kind of weird tension to revolve around her having the same name as Don instead of like him having a black secretary. And they said that it's like, it's supposed to be kind of confusing and like unsettling on purpose. But yeah, I just think it's funny, like, especially with Don, it's like she was the most qualified. Like he's desperately trying to defend this. And I just think it's great.
I mean, I didn't stop Roger, though, from making his little racist comment.
That's true. Yeah.
But, dude, I mean, starting off the episode, like, with Harry, too. First off, so many good Harry dunks this episode. Like, fuck that dude. Like, just good shit. But
we really are getting into, like, prime evil Harry at this point.
Yeah. But him going, yeah, hard to tell who's who around the office is just such a good joke. Like, thank you to the writer who wrote that one in. I loved it so much.
Good joke in the sense that we get to laugh at how much we hate Harry. And you even have like that nice little moment where even where Megan is like still like, oh, fuck this guy, like from the last episode, because she just like so quickly dismisses him. I mean, he's like, everybody hates him these days in the show.
I know you weren't a big fan of the Rolling Stone backstage scene, John, but I did get a good laugh out of
the trade wins thing. That was funny. They really did open for Rolling Stones at that concert.
I know, yeah. I mean, that was a good bit. I wasn't sure though if like, now that you mentioned the Who thing, I didn't know if that was supposed to be like a tie, like the Who, like I don't know, whatever. It's not important, but in any case, yeah, I thought that scene got a good laugh for me.
All right, well, that's about all I have, guys. Was there anything? I mean, yeah,
did we miss anything? I kind of wanted to talk about just the whole idea of hiring the younger generation and talent and I think that like the Roger Pete thing and how I just think that's all very.
Well, you cut out a little bit. You
said very what?
Very interesting.
Oh, okay.
That's what I was saying. Like, because I thought it was like good. I thought it was a good framing for like Peggy and where she's at in her career and how she's thinking about what comes next. And I thought it was interesting. She's not like scared by talent. But like, honestly, I didn't see like that's the last guy I hired line from Roger, like that coming to fruition, because that's been such a storyline like the past like season and a half. I just thought I thought that was great.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of fascinating for me watching this. I don't know how you guys feel on a rewatch, but like, I do feel like Pete is vindicated in fucking over Roger because he's been such a pain in the ass and kind of held him back and all this stuff. But now that Pete finally gets what he wants and like, you know, sticks it to Roger, I do kind of feel bad for Roger. I'm like, oh man, you know, not that he like really deserves a win at this point, but like I can feel the sympathy and that stuff. I think that's a good showcase for the show being able to take characters who can be often like unlikable or hard to deal with, and then in the next episode making them sympathetic or more endearing and all that. I think that's a fine example of that.
Yeah. I guess the reason for me, like, I mean, I do like how the episode does use kind of humor and stuff to kind of get the message across on like the youth culture. And I like how with Peggy, it does feel more nuanced. It feels like she is kind of conflicted because she is part of the youth culture, but she's sort of facing the first vestige of like, you know, a threat. But she's, of course, you know, going to be more sympathetic to the new replacing the old and all of that. And yeah, I do agree with like the Roger stuff, especially. I think that that's what you're saying. That's a great point, Mike, that like it has been set up. It feels earned. And I mean, Pete is dastardly in this and the way he disrespects Roger. But I do really dig that scene between Don and Roger. It feels so vulnerable. It feels like the two of them, you know, they've had their riffs and everything over the seasons, but you can just tell at this point, they're just real friends. Like they're buddies and like they talk to each other and confide in each other a lot more readily than they used to. Like Don is no longer putting on this facade. You could maybe chalk it out to like Don no longer sees Roger as a boss, right? So he can be a little bit more of like, well, here's what's really going on in my life. Like Betty has cancer. And, you know, there's that moment where Roger's like, she's a fighter. And even Don's just kind of like, come on, man. Like, you know me, like, let's be real with each other. And it's a good bro moment.
Dudes rock. Obviously the theme of Mad Men is dudes rock.
Yeah.
Dudes rock. Yeah. But yeah, when the Don stuff though, when the themes kind of go with like Don and like the all that stuff. Like, again, that conversation he has with like the teenager about, like, we're worried about you. It's just like, it just feels so false. He does have that comment. He says the children come back and eat you, which does feel like a pretty aggressive sort of like thing for Don to say about it. Cause he has kind of vacillated between like, Megan kind of keeps him young. Right. So it seems like he goes back and forth between like, I do want to still feel young. I do want to kind of, understand this generation, but I also don't want to do it at the expense of my own identity, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I guess for me, like, it's not that it's uninteresting, but I feel like the last episode did that so much better that like I just kind of feel like, yeah, I mean, it does it fine, but I just don't think it really adds anything to that in this one.
Yeah, totally agree. I don't have any trivia left, and I think we just about covered it. Was there anything else you guys wanted to chat about?
The only
How's your day going?
The only thing I wanted to, and I kind of wanted to save this until the end because it really doesn't impact the episode one way or the other. But I do remember when the conversation around Fat Betty was going around, there is a video on YouTube called Fat Betty, but it's to the tune of Ram Jam's Black Betty. And it was one of those things where it's like I had forgotten all about that video until the scene where Betty gets out of the tub, because the line, "Getting out of the tub, bam-a-lam," has been stuck in my head for years. But I kind of forgot that it came from that video. So yeah, I just, that line has once again entered my brain just because it's so innocuous, but I just think there's something just very funny about it. But that whole video is kind of funny, but also is very much a like dated fat joke from 2012.
Yeah.
That also gets referenced surprisingly in Mad Men Carousel, which blew me away. I was like, okay, wow.
I will say when Harry Crane is in the car and he's eating the White Castle burgers, there was this comment where Weiner and Hamm were like, that's actually not that much food. Like, cause 20, they said the 20 White Castle burgers is like a meal. But yeah, it's obviously still played for laughs.
John, you have to remember that Harry's on a diet.
Well, he has that whole thing too here. He's just like, you have to eat first. Like, I bring it and then they eat at everything. And it's like, man, you are just a terrible human being. Like, you don't want to feed your family. Like, what an asshole. He's just like a purely selfish person.
How many kids does he have at this point? Just the one?
I think he has one or two.
Okay.
I think maybe two. Because he had the whole baby shower thing. They might have had one more. I don't know for sure.
Okay, whatever.
He's the second child. That's for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that'll do it, I guess, for this week's episode of Mad Men. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back for season 5, episode 4. This one's called Mystery Date. And well, I have to tell you ahead of time that unfortunately, Jon Hamm only directs one other episode of the series. I don't know if you're already aware. But that's not going to be until next season, his last episode there. So
I knew that he directed at least one more. I thought he directed maybe 2 more, but I guess it's just the one. The next one I saw in the Carousel book that it's Matt Shakman directed.
It's Matt Shakman. Speaking of WandaVision, he directed WandaVision and some Game of Thrones stuff too.
I was gonna say, speaking of the 60s, because he's directing
Fantastic Four
right now, and that takes place in the 60s.
Yeah, what a get. All right, but that'll do it for us. Thanks so much for listening to the show. We'll see you all again hopefully soon. Bye-bye.
Getting out of the tub, bam, bam.